Trudeau. Let's start with Ukraine. There's lots to get to. Let's get to it. In Ukraine, of course, right? Justin Trudeau says 2 years after the Russian regime launched its invasion of Ukraine, Canada's support for the Ukrainian people remains steadfast. To reaffirm that support, I'm in Kiev with Chrystia Freeland, and Bill Blair will be able to share more updates later, so keep checking back. And the amazing Zoltan says, bro, it's 3 a.m. on your regular sleep schedule. Exactly how many lines of blow did you snort before thinking about about Ukraine tonight? Just the precise amount, please. Also, should we expect you to come back to the airport tarmac looking like this again? Yes, here is Justin Trudeau's next tweet. So this was 3:30 in the morning. This was 3:49 a.m. talking about Ukraine. So I mean, it's weird timing. Justin Trudeau 3 hours later, 6:30 in the morning, says 2 years ago Putin thought he could make quick work of strategic targets in Ukraine, like the Hostomel airport. But we're standing here today because he was wrong, because the strength and resolve of Ukraine defenders prove him wrong. So Justin Trudeau is focused on Ukraine's success, and singularly on Ukraine's success, despite him being the Prime Minister of Canada. Here's Justin Trudeau starring in a government-produced propaganda film about Ukraine and kind of reimagining history, if you ask me. And Ryan says this is a government propaganda video. All of it is meant to psychologically bait you. The eerie music, the CCTV edited clips, and a vile narrator. Unbelievable. Yeah, it's really something. It's very, very interesting to consider. This is what our tax dollars are paying for. Scary. Yikes, right? Anyway, here is Justin Trudeau. Just understand what we're dealing with here. Like, this is a polished propaganda video meant to influence people. That's the point. Here we go.
February 24th.
Oh, it's too fast. Okay, hold on. Here we go.
22. In the early hours of that Thursday morning, Russian tanks rolled across Ukraine's borders as Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale invasion. An invasion that has unleashed unspeakable violence and brutality, that has left countless dead and forced millions to flee, that has upended peace and stability in Europe. Months before, as early as November of 2021, satellite images showed Russia building up its troops and military equipment on Ukraine's borders. Provocations followed in the weeks and months thereafter, escalating a crisis of Russia's own making. When Putin chose war, he expected to make quick work of the conflict.
I'm just going to leave it there. I can't deal with him much. That was too much. Okay. That is partially, I mean, yeah, there was a buildup of troops in 2021, but there was a whole plan to bait Russia into attacking and then claiming that Russia attacked, blah, 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 blah. So they just went ahead and attacked, really, before Ukraine or the people in charge of that area of Ukraine at the time were ready, I think, and they caught them off guard, or they went early, or whatever it was. But, you know, there's elements of truth in this, but there's a whole 7 years before 2021 that is not being discussed or talked about at all. There's NATO's involvement in the coup. There's all sorts of stuff that's just being completely ignored, right? And it reminds me of other campaigns of misinformation and disinformation that we've experienced, right? And it's very concerning. Government.exe is responding to the same video. He says, Justin Trudeau, Canadians will continue standing with Ukraine for as long as it takes, regardless of the cost to stop Putin's unprovoked war. Over the last 2 years, over $100 billion has been sent to Ukraine from Canada, USA, and Europe. Who else is tired of seeing their tax dollars sent overseas while their own nation crumbles around them? Yeah, yep. Sure. Melanie Jolie says, Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. She says, today, with our allies, we are sending a clear message to Russia. Ukraine will not be defeated in the face of Putin's illegal war. Canada is sanctioning another 10 individuals and 153 entities enabling the war, including those who use proxies to enable this war. So, again, very interesting. Russia is the whole Putin Tucker Carlson interview is being overshadowed by this propaganda push. They're trying to reset the narrative and repeat it, say it again, and people will totally believe it, right? Like, oh man, we were there for, because of our allies, right? And we're sending a clear message to Russia that, in the face of this illegal war, right, we're on the side of good here. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. And this is the same nonsense. The Liberal Party's tweeting this, Xing this, but this happened on February 6th, and I remember this. Liberal Party says Pierre Poilievre and his conservatives had a choice to stand with Ukraine or turn their backs. They abandoned Ukraine. We never will. Never will. Like, that sounds very expensive. That sounds extremely expensive, right? Like, ooh, I don't know about that. That seems like a big commitment. I'm not prepared to tie the knot with Ukraine. Like, I didn't even think we were dating. All of a sudden, we're financially liable for the whole country forever. We never will. What does that mean? Justin Trudeau fell in love hard, and he overcommitted us. Here's Bohemian Atmosphere, and he says the UK is effed. And gov.uk is reporting UK to boost Ukraine's artillery reserves with $245 million in munition package. The UK will spend $245 million, pounds, not dollars, throughout the next year to produce and invigorate supply chains to produce urgently needed artillery ammunition for Ukraine. Let's get the West on war footing. Let's get the West making artillery, because we need more artillery in the world, right? There's not enough Christmas presents and not nearly enough artillery. So the UK is starting that. And here is the mayor of London. And what he wants to do is, his ULEZ, ultra low emission zones? He wants to take cars that are not ULEZ compliant, and instead of scrapping them, which has been seen by the locals as being wasteful, send them to Ukraine. So I think what they did here is, it's a little bit of art of the deal. You ask for way more than you dare to get. So basically, they're destroying these perfectly good cars. And then they've got this propaganda machine saying giving to Ukraine's good. So, okay, well, we won't destroy your cars anymore. We'll just send them to Ukraine. So, like, that sounds better, but people will still know, even brainwashed people will still know there's something hinky with all of this, right? I think. Anyway, maybe Art of the Deal is wrong, but it's like they bent more. They destroyed cars, and then they backed off by just sending them to Ukraine. And the real solution that people want is just to use the damn cars and to scrap the ULEZ nonsense, because it's nonsense, and it's a communist plot to take control of Western society. It just is. Here is what's going on from Sadiq Khan's own words. Just send the cars to Ukraine. Here we go.
The scrapping of high-polluting cars is seen by many as a complete waste. But now non-ULEZ compliant vehicles can be given a second life in a country where they're desperately needed, Ukraine.
I know Londoners may think, how can I help? One of the ways you can help, if you've got a non-ULEZ compliant vehicle, is contact TfL. They'll signpost you to British Ukrainian aid, and you can be confident that your vehicle will be sent to Ukraine, but also you'll receive money from the scrappage fund.
The idea isn't new. Soon after ULEZ expansion, it was suggested, but there were concerns about the rules. In December, the government confirmed there was no legal reason why not. And as Ukraine enters its third year of bombardment, the mayor of Kyiv, whose city's infrastructure is crumbling, welcomes the support.
Yeah, we love more cars. Our infrastructure's crumbling. What do we need? Way more cars. Let's put more cars on the road ASAP. Everybody loves cars. A free car for everybody to drive around the crumbling infrastructure. Thanks, England. Rock. I mean, these high-polluting vehicles that aren't good enough for London. Thank you. We'll drive them around our crumbling infrastructure. Cheers. Are they gas-powered? Wonderful. Right? These gas-powered vehicles are going to be more valuable. The resale market is crumbling, right? They can't find enough cars to resell right now in Canada. And so, like, getting cars is more expensive than it used to be. Like, it used to be you could get a used car for pretty cheap. And now it's cheap only because the electric vehicles are so expensive, and the gas-powered vehicles, they're not being pushed, so the sales aren't as much, and so on and so forth. But I've seen a lot of people complaining about the price of used vehicles. I remember when I was a kid, the back of newspapers used to be full of cars, and they all had price tags in the hundreds. And the hundreds was the weekly price. like if you get a loan, this is how much you'll have to pay over 2 years or 3 years or whatever it is. And I always remember thinking the cars were still really cheap, like $6,000, $7,000. I thought, man, that's really cheap. And now, like a car like that's $13,000, $14,000, $15,000 more, $16,000. I know a person who, not older, but their work went online, and so they stopped driving, and so they got rid of their car, and then they regretted getting rid of their car because they sold their car and they got a good price for it, but then they went to buy another car because they realized they needed a car. And found that they couldn't even replace like a like-on-like car for the same amount. The markup was remarkable. Anyway, regardless. And the price, I think the price they got was like $15,000 for a car. And I thought, how are they getting that because the car was relatively old, but trying to get a similar one, air conditioning, like all the rest, right? So whatever. Anyway, not to be waylaid. Let's get back to Ukraine. Here's Lord Ashcroft. And he says, my focus on groups on politicians' priorities versus their own. I couldn't find Gaza on the map. I don't care about the woke stuff. How are my kids ever going to buy a house? So this is in the UK, and the UK wants to send all those cars to Kiev. The UK wants to send all this money to Kiev. The UK wants to fix Gaza. The UK is currently having problems with aggressive Islamic mobs telling parliamentarians that they better vote in a certain way, and if they don't, we know where you live, and we're going to take you out type deal. But the constituents who are not being represented because of these foreign issues dominating the legislature are being left behind. Here's a letter from one of Lord Ashcroft's people, I guess. And take it with a grain of salt. It's the internet. Anybody could have written that, right? But the letter says, notably, some were angry that the political attention seemed to be consumed by what they regarded as irrelevant questions. I'm getting more and more turned off with what they're talking about. They're debating issues I have never cared about in my 44 years. I couldn't find Gaza on a map. I don't care about the woke stuff. I've struggled to get my daughter into a good school. I can't get a doctor's appointment for love nor money. How are my kids ever going to buy a house? Just crack on? Okay. Issues people mentioned spontaneously included imminent council tax rises, together with extra costs. They're going to charge us extra for the green bins. We're paying more for less service, striking doctors, struggling local services, mortgage rates, uncertainty over the government's free childcare scheme, decaying infrastructure, and despite falling headline inflation, the cost of living, still including food, fuel, and energy prices. So yeah, people need energy to live, and fuel, and which is energy, and all of the rest of it. And sure, maybe the economy shows signs of doing pretty well, et cetera, but ultimately, if the people are struggling to afford the basics, then the government is failing, and we shouldn't be sending money out of the country, not the UK and not Canada either. This is former UK Prime Minister. And I've said before, and I thought, like the other day I showed a former Premier of British Columbia, BC. I'll still call it British Columbia. And he was talking about chemtrails, and he was thinking that he was in a position of authority and he would be able to have an impact on this. And he was not able to even get the information he wanted. Never mind like making a call to stop it, right? That wasn't even in the cards. He wanted to find out more about this. Maybe he was looking for the information after. I think he said he was looking for the information after he was premier. It was in 2013 that he submitted Freedom of Information, and he was premier in the late 80s or 90s, I think is what people were saying in the comments. So, but fundamentally, you'd think that a former premier would have the contacts to be able to get that information, right? And if he didn't know about it in the 80s, maybe it wasn't even happening in the 80s, right? Maybe that wasn't even a twinkle in the eye in the 80s. It probably was. It was probably happening in the 80s. But Liz Truss got up to the position of prime minister, and here she says to Steve Bannon, I wasn't holding the reins of the decisions. That was the central banks. So if you get into a position that you can challenge any of this and you don't take out the central bank, you're not really challenging any of this. See what I'm saying? In my opinion. And if you don't nationalize the bank, like remove the central bankers and issue your own currency, fix it in a way that makes monetary sense. I'm not up on the financial exactly how all of that works, but fix it in a way that takes the incentive for the bankers to keep it all to themselves, the lending, the debt cycle, right? Because Greece used to have inflation. What did they do? Before the euro was introduced around the EU zone. Greece managed its own drachma, and there were problems. There were all sorts of issues. People didn't pay taxes and blah 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 blah. But they could manage their own money, and they could do all sorts of things to offset that. I guess it's not great, but when you've got this centralized EU situation, they couldn't deal with all of those internal financial issues the same way they used to. So it created all sorts of problems. But it's the central bankers that are driving the decisions of government, according to Liz Truss. Here's that exchange. Here we go.
I found out when I got into number 10 is I thought that if I got to the top of the tree, I would be able to implement those conservative policies.
So you think once you're prime minister, as a little girl, I was thinking, if I get prime minister, I'll be like Churchill, change the country.
Exactly.
That's not how it works.
Exactly. And what I discovered was that I was not holding the levers. The levers were held by the Bank of England, by the Office of Budget Responsibility. They weren't held by the Prime Minister or the Chancellor. And I think that's a massive, that's a massive problem.
Hang on. You're saying the central bank, the Bank of England, is one of the things that controls. Are you a conspiracy theory person? You almost sound like Worm. You're MAGA.
What I'm saying, Steve, is that if the Bank of England governor can't be sacked and the Prime Minister can be sacked, then the Bank of England governor is going to have more power than the Prime Minister. And that is a problem in a democracy. Because the fact is the left have succeeded in infiltrating our campuses. Is what I've...
Yeah. Yep. There's a problem. I've probably misexplained something there with regards to Greece being able to manage their money, blah, 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 blah. But the introduction of the Fed, the introduction of the ability for countries as a whole to borrow money from entities like the Fed, and having a situation where those entities themselves are more powerful than a 4-year cycle president, prime minister, or any elected body. And another problem, and so that is what I was trying to highlight, and I probably didn't highlight it very well. And another problem is having intelligence agencies. Like, a lot of these guys are 10 years. They're 10 years running their intelligence agency, and probably by the end of it, they view themselves as more important than the president for keeping things together and doing what needs to be done, and so on and so forth. And who knows? I don't know the reality of the whole thing, but it seems like that would also be a problem for governance, right? Like, if you've got a president who can serve for 8 years at max, at the will of the people, kind of, if you believe in that, and then you've got an intelligence head who engineers, government overthrow, government changes, and also like overthrows governments in foreign countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They feel very powerful. They run all sorts of things, and they say, I know better than this guy. We got to get this guy out of here. Let's use that hammer and sickle or hammer and scorecard thing here and just fix this problem, right? Like, is that out of the question? I think that probably not. Here's the spy balloon story. Dr. Lee says another spy balloon is flying over the United States. Is that surprising? Let's remind what I revealed about the Chinese spy balloon last year. It's been verified. So here's the inside paper. It says U.S. is tracking a high altitude balloon flying over the western part of the country. Military aircraft reportedly spotted the balloon and determined that it's not a threat, but its origin and purpose is still unknown. It's probably the aliens. The aliens sent the balloon to distract us from the Chinese. So the aliens and the Chinese, of course, are working together. I'm just kidding. Let's talk about money, because money is fun. Kirk says the Liberal government posted a budgetary deficit of $23.6 billion for the first 9 months of the fiscal year 23-24. That's up from a $5.5 billion deficit over the same period last year. It's a whole lot of financial numbers, but I'll get to the meat of it. Expenses increased by $27.9 billion, while revenues increased by $8.1 billion. So we're spending a lot more than we're bringing in, and that trend is continuing. And again, no accountability or anything like that. Chrystia Freeland is allowed to spend like a drunken sailor, and that's all of our tax dollars for where Ukraine probably, probably. Nick says, honestly, this is a joke. What Trudeau Liberals have made normal in Canada, food bank lineups right beside MP Bill Blair's office. He's in Ukraine right now. The fact Trudeau caused a lot of the price inflation in Canada seems lost on the Liberals. Yeah, yep. It's printing money is bad. So, which is why I think I got something wrong about talking about how Greece handled its money. They just printed money to deal with it. So It's probably bad. Anyway, Polling Canada says young people are simply leaving Ontario. Yes, well, here's Bill Blair's office, which is in Ontario. And there's a big lineup of people trying to access the food bank. Right there's Bill Blair's office. There's the food bank. And so that's very, very indicative of, well, people not being able to get by, right? And so what do they do? They go where it's supposed to be cheaper, but then the influx of those people fleeing Ontario for cheaper pastures, if you will, pushes up the prices in those places too. Not to mention the immigration is happening there just as much as it's happening in Ontario. Although I guess Ontario does get a lot of immigrants, don't we? Here is No, and he's sharing this video from Canadian Club Toronto, and it says Tory MP Shunavi Munjumder, I'm getting it terribly wrong, so sorry, said yesterday people have lost trust in public health, the media, etc. Every institution has lost. I'll let him say it. It's a worthwhile little speech, and here we go.
I mean, Sabrina's probably noticing on her doors now. I noticed this last year. There is a lot of pain in this country. I mean, every fourth or fifth door in South Calgary, people were breaking down at the doors. People can't trust anything anymore. Every institution that was supposed to be an arbiter of public trust, whether it's public health, the media, the academy, you name it, every institution has lost trust. And to restore that trust, to restore that promise, requires being as this is what you're going to get as you can. And I think that's what's resonating in the communications that Lanceman and Poilievre especially are so enormously successful at. I hope to replicate it, but like I said, I'm trying to just be like Adam Chambers.
So, I mean, talking about people breaking down at the doors, that's Calgary, not Ontario, and people are fleeing Ontario for cheaper places. And it's not out east, I'll tell you. The milk's so expensive. I wish... Somebody has to tell me in the comments, why can't we have a dairy farm in Newfoundland? Is there a reason? Could you have a dairy farm? Is it just because there's no grass? Is it just there's grazing as a problem? Anyway, that could be it. But I've seen grass. Anyway, let me know if you understand. And if you know about, I think there's two main sources of milk, but they might just be brought in from the ferry, but maybe not. So I don't know. Newfoundland milk, it's very, very expensive. It's like $8 for 4 liters. $8.50 that's cheap for 4 liters. So it seems like, and the only thing you can buy is 2-liter cartons. And I know I'm fixated on the milk. I get it, but it's one of those things that it seems like there's a better way of doing these things. And instead of doing them the better way, we do them the way we've always done them, because maybe the capital is difficult to raise. But I'm just interested in what's the stumbling block? What's the sticking point? Like, maybe it's not financially viable. Maybe. Anyway, I digress. Back to this. Anand is talking about France's Minister of the Economy, and he's talking about unlocking the savings of Europeans, right? Which he says now here's what the tweet says. You might know him as the genius strategist who said he was going to cause the collapse of the Russian economy. Now he's straight out declaring that Europe has run out of money, it does not have sufficient financial reserves, and that they need to mobilize all the savings of Europeans that are currently dormant in European bank accounts, and in order to finance the future, including Europe's defense effort. This is a complete and direct translation of what he said. So there's a whole speech, blah, blah, blah. But Chrystia Freeland said basically the same thing. She wanted to unlock the savings of Canadians and to unleash that kind of stimulus for the economy in 2020, right? And it's just interesting, the similarities in the language. And I mean, it's a different language, but the similarities in the meaning, right? The sentiment behind it. Here's from 2020, December 4, 2020. This is Chrystia Freeland. I feel like it's going to be loud. We'll just back it off here. Here we go.
I want to thank you, first of all, for really zeroing in on the preloaded stimulus idea. None of us have a crystal ball, but economists like Ben, like Doug, have been pointing out that some Canadian households, and it tends to be the better off households, do have quite a lot of money that they've saved because there hasn't been that much to do in the pandemic. And certainly it would be great if that money could go towards driving our recovery. And I want to make an offer now to all of your listeners. If people have ideas on how the government can act to help unlock that preloaded stimulus, I am very, very interested. Maybe, as Doug Porter was suggesting, it happens by itself. That's the best case scenario for me. But if people have ideas on how we can really, try to unleash that, and particularly unleash it in the parts of the Canadian economy that really need support, tourism, hospitality, domestic services, let me know.
So, very similar rhetoric, in my opinion, coming from Chrystia Freeland a couple of years ago and the France minister. Now, the difference, in my opinion, is he's trying to say we need to go after bank accounts to even fund defense. So I don't know how practically that'll work, but I mean, the U.S. government took people's gold, right, in the 30s, right? They took people's gold because they said people are hoarding gold, so we need to take their gold. So, man, there's a long history. Here's the IRS. How could the government know that there are people who have all of this money in their savings and there's this preloaded stimulus, et cetera, et cetera? This guy says AI has full access to your bank accounts. And this girl's like, what? And this guy is an IRS. Who is this guy? Hold on a second. Okay, it says on the screen, his name is Alex Mena, and he's a criminal investigation unit, internal IRS. So he's the, I don't know, he would be one of the guys who investigate flagged IRS tax dodging, whatever it is. And so during this interview, he says AI has full access to bank accounts. And the girl he's with is incredulous. She's like, what? Here we go.
So AI has access to like everybody's bank account? What?
They see the amount in your bank account, yes.
I can't. Is it constitutional to do that?
I doubt it. They are assholes.
Really?
They are the definition of an asshole. All of them. They have no problem like going after the small people, putting people in prison, like destroying people's life.
Really?
They have no problem doing that. They said that we were all nice when we started. Now look at us. They are like robots right now. All of them.
I can't wait to give this news to all of my friends.
Yeah, please don't tell them my name.
Do you think that you would have to have a right?
No, not with her.
She says, you'd think you'd have to have evidence to access the bank accounts. He says, not with the IRS. They can audit whoever they want. So I'll leave it there. There's another 30-odd seconds, but it's pretty interesting that this IRS criminal investigations guy is confirming to a date and presumably a hidden camera that AI has access and can audit these bank accounts on demand. So they know more about you than you know yourself. And like AI, I think is probably really good. I've seen legal AIs or the promise of legal AIs, like the sales copy for legal AIs. I don't know if it actually works, but it seems to. And AIs that are supposed to do spreadsheets and bookkeeping and things like that. And they seem to be quite capable. So I have no reason to believe that an AI unleashed and trained to be an IRS agent would be equally capable. Does that make sense? So scary stuff, because now, well, if you've got agents, if you've got AI that can work independently, like a human can kind of work independently, like here's a group of files, look through them to see if you find anything irregular, go. If you can find something that'll work through all of that, then the human person only works on files that the AI flags. Wow, that's a whole new world, right? Like a whole new thing, because the capacity just increases exponentially. Flex says, Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.